Anna walked into the small, dimly lit room, her heart pounding. She could barely contain the rush of excitement coursing through her veins. Today was the day, the day. The day she would finally receive what had always been promised to her, the inheritance. Her steps faltered for a moment as her eyes fell on the letter. It sat neatly on the oak table, untouched, waiting. The heavy seal of the lawyer's office glinted under the soft glow of the desk lamp. The crisp paper, the promise of her future, it was all contained within that envelope. She could already picture the life that awaited her, a new house, no debts, and the freedom to leave behind the past, including the constant tension between her and Michael. It had been a long, grueling journey to get here. For years, she had watched as others got their share of wealth, while she was stuck in the shadows, struggling. She had spent too long trying to make ends meet, to patch up relationships, to heal the wounds of her past. But now, this inheritance would change everything. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope, the weight of it almost too much to bear. She could feel her pulse racing as she carefully slid the letter out. She held her breath as she unfolded the paper, scanning the words. But before she could get very far, the door behind her creaked open. She froze. Her heart skipped a beat. Without turning around, Anna knew who it was. Michael. His presence was always a mix of calm and tension, and today was no different. The man who had been her partner for the last 8 years seemed to be standing just outside her reach. In some ways, they had built a life together, but in others, more often than not, they were strangers, constantly skirting around each other's secrets. She knew something was wrong, something in his eyes that didn't match the way he looked at her just a few weeks ago. She slowly turned to face him, trying to hide the flutter of unease in her stomach. Michael stood there, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. His dark hair was slightly messy, a few strands falling over his forehead. He looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept in days. His eyes, though, were sharp, too sharp. "Michael?" she asked, her voice trembling more than she wanted to admit. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared at her, his gaze flicking from the letter in her hands to her face and back again. The room suddenly felt smaller, more oppressive. She could feel her pulse quicken, anxiety creeping in. Michael had never been this distant before. He had always been calm, even when things were tough, even when their relationship was at its breaking point. But now, something was different. "Anna," he began slowly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "There's something you need to know." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She had never seen him like this, nervous, uncertain. She couldn't place the tension in the air, but it was palpable. "What's going on, Michael?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as her fingers clutched the letter tighter. Was it a joke? Was he playing with her, again? She hated this part of their relationship, the games, the teasing. The emotional roller coaster that often ended in her wondering what was real and what was a fabrication. He stepped into the room, his steps slow and deliberate. It felt like he was trying to process every word before saying it. "I've been keeping something from you," Michael said, his voice dropping. Anna's chest tightened. What could he possibly be hiding? They had talked about everything, everything except the inheritance. Could it be that he had something to do with it? Could he be planning to take it all for himself? "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking, her grip tightening around the letter. She could feel the blood drain from her face as a knot of panic began to form in her stomach. Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "This inheritance, Anna. It's not what you think." His words hit her like a blow. Her hands trembled so violently that the letter nearly slipped from her grasp. She stared at him, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking as she tried to process what was happening. The inheritance was hers. It had been promised to her. She had spent sleepless nights wondering how she would use it, dreaming about how it would change her life. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the words Michael had just spoken. There was no way he could be serious, right? He had to be joking. This wasn't real. No, Michael, you're wrong, Anna said, shaking her head as she took a step back. This is mine. It's the inheritance I've waited for. Her chest tightened, the air feeling thinner with every passing second. How could he say this to her? She felt betrayed even before she understood what he meant. Was this just another one of his games? Was he trying to get inside her head again? But Michael didn't back down. He stared at her, his face cold, distant. It's not yours. Not entirely. There's something you don't know. His voice was sharp now, his usual calmness replaced by something darker, more dangerous. Anna's mind was racing, trying to find a way to process what he was saying. She could feel a growing sense of dread seeping into her bones. Something was wrong, something that went far beyond the inheritance. It wasn't just about money. It was about the lies that had been building between them for years. Michael, what are you saying? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The room seemed to spin as the weight of his words began to settle on her chest. His eyes flicked to the letter in her hand, then back to her. He seemed to hesitate, as if weighing whether or not to go on. But then he spoke again, his voice low and full of intent. The inheritance, it's not just for you, he said. It's meant for both of us, Anne. You're not the only one who's been waiting for it. Anna's mind went blank. The room felt as if it were closing in on her, the walls pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. This couldn't be happening. Michael couldn't be serious. This was her inheritance. Her future. No, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. That's impossible. What are you saying? This is my inheritance. Michael's eyes darkened. You need to understand, Anna. You're not the only one who's been involved in this. There are things you don't know, things that have been kept from you. The money? It's not just yours to claim. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. So what? You think you're entitled to it too? Her voice wavered with a mix of disbelief and anger. Michael remained silent, his expression unreadable. Suddenly, Anna felt cold. It wasn't just the room that had grown cold, it was the realization that everything she thought she knew had been a lie. She took a step back, struggling to comprehend what he was saying. You've been keeping this from me, she whispered, her voice trembling. This whole time? Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the crumpled letter in his hand. The look in his eyes made her stomach drop. I'm sorry, Anna, he said quietly. But it's too late to change anything now. You'll understand soon enough. Before she could say another word, Michael turned and walked toward the door. He paused, his back to her, and then said one last thing. Don't trust anyone. Not even me. With that, he left the room. Anna stood there, frozen. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Her chest tightened as her heart pounded in her ears. Her entire world was shifting beneath her feet, and she didn't know how to stop it. The inheritance had promised her a new beginning, but now she wasn't so sure. One thing was certain, the life she had imagined for herself was about to be shattered in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Anna stood still for several moments after Michael left the room, her hands still trembling. The letter she had been holding now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her mind was swirling in a fog of confusion, anger, and disbelief. The room seemed to close in on her, the air thick with the suffocating silence left in Michael's wake. She glanced at the door, half expecting him to return with an apology, with some kind of explanation, but no sound came from the hallway. Her pulse was pounding in her temples as she stared at the crumpled letter in her hands. His words echoed in her mind, "You're not the only one who's been waiting for it." The inheritance? It's not just yours to claim. The inheritance. The very thing that had kept her going, the promise of a better life, free of debt, free of struggle, free of constant anxiety. She had worked so hard, fought so many battles, just to get to this point. She had been certain that the inheritance was the light at the end of the tunnel, the reward for all the pain she'd endured. But now it felt like the light had been snuffed out, replaced by an overwhelming darkness. Anna's hands shook as she dropped the letter onto the table. She couldn't bear to look at it any longer. She felt a sense of loss she hadn't expected. Not just for the money, but for the life she thought she would have. For the man she thought she knew. What was Michael hiding? Why had he kept this from her? And, more importantly, what did he mean by, "It's not just yours to claim"? For a long time, Anna simply stood there, lost in her thoughts. It was as if the world outside of her had stopped existing. Her heart felt heavy, as if it had sunk into her stomach, and her mind raced through the possibilities. There were so many unanswered questions, too many to count, and every time she tried to grasp one, it slipped away like sand through her fingers. She finally snapped out of her trance when the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it Michael returning? Or someone else? She rushed to the window, her breath catching in her throat as she peeked outside. To her surprise, she saw a car parked in front of the house, an unfamiliar black SUV. She didn't recognize the vehicle, nor did she recognize the two figures who had just gotten out of the car. They were both tall, both dressed in dark suits, their faces hidden behind sunglasses, despite the fact that it was nearing dusk. They walked toward the front door with purpose, like they had somewhere they needed to be. A sense of dread crept over her. Who were they? And why were they here? Anna's instinct told her to hide, to lock the door and pretend she wasn't home. But curiosity got the best of her, and she found herself walking toward the front door, her hands trembling as she reached for the handle. She opened the door just as one of the men was about to knock. He looked her up and down before offering a tight smile. There was something about him that made Anna's skin crawl. He wasn't just some random visitor, there was an edge to him, an underlying sense of danger. "Can I help you?" Anna asked, her voice shaky but firm, the words coming out more like a question than a statement. "We're here to speak with you," the man said, his voice low and even. He didn't offer an explanation or a handshake, just a cold, matter-of-fact statement. Anna's heart raced. About what? He glanced over his shoulder at his companion, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed, scanning the surroundings like he was waiting for something, or someone, to appear. The man at the door turned back to Anna and leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "It's about your husband. And the inheritance." Her breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to slam the door in their faces, but something inside her told her to hear them out. She hesitated, weighing her options, but the unease was already there, gnawing at her insides. "What about Michael?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the anxiety rising in her chest. She needed to know. Needed to understand what was happening. The man looked at her for a moment before replying, his face hardening. "You need to come with us. We have some things to discuss, and it's better if we do it in private." A million thoughts rushed through Anna's mind. Should she go with them? Was this some sort of threat? Or was Michael in trouble? There were too many questions, too many unknowns, and she had no idea what to do next. She wanted to refuse, to tell them to leave, but the words stuck in her throat. She looked past the man at the black SUV parked in her driveway and felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that this was all part of a much bigger, darker picture she wasn't seeing. Finally, after a moment of hesitation, she nodded. "I'll go with you." Without another word, the man gestured toward the car. The other man stepped forward, holding the passenger door open, and Anna reluctantly climbed into the back seat. As the door slammed shut behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking straight into a nightmare. The drive was long and silent. The man in the passenger seat didn't say a word, and neither did the driver. Anna tried to make sense of what was happening, but the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. Who were these men? Why were they so sure they could just show up at her doorstep and demand her presence? And what did they know about Michael? The car finally came to a stop in front of a large, imposing building. It was an old, dark structure that seemed out of place in the quiet neighborhood. The windows were dark, the door heavy and locked, and the only thing that made it stand out was the cold, metallic sign next to the entrance that read, Carter and Associates, Law and Investigation. Anna's breath hitched in her throat. This was a law office, she could tell that much from the sign, but why had they brought her here? Was this connected to Michael's secrets? The man opened the car door and gestured for her to follow him. She climbed out, her legs feeling weak beneath her. The weight of everything she had just learned, everything she had just been thrown into, threatened to collapse her. But she didn't have a choice. She had to face whatever was coming. The man led her inside the building, his footsteps echoing in the hollow space. Anna followed him down a long, sterile hallway that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what had just happened. They entered a small office at the end of the hallway. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with dusty law books, and there was a large desk cluttered with papers. Behind the desk sat a man in his mid-40s, wearing a gray suit and looking at her over the rim of his glasses. His eyes were calculating, cold, and sharp. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, his voice smooth but distant. "Please have a seat. We need to talk about your husband. And what he's really been up to." Anna's heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught in her throat as she sat down, unable to think of anything else but the words that hung in the air between them. What had Michael been hiding? Anna felt like a ghost as she sat across from the man in the gray suit. His eyes were sharp, almost too sharp, studying her every movement. She tried to steady her breath, but the pounding of her heart made it impossible to stay calm. She was in a strange, sterile office, surrounded by cold walls and shelves lined with law books. She had never imagined her life could take such a turn. The man behind the desk, who introduced himself as Edward Carter, had made no move to offer her a seat or any comfort. Instead, he stared at her with a detached, professional gaze, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. The men who had brought her here stood silently in the corner, watching her like silent sentinels. "So," Edward began, his voice smooth but filled with an undeniable edge. "I'm sure you're wondering why you're here, Ms. Whitaker. And I assure you, this is all very important." He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. "It's about your husband, Michael." The mention of his name sent a jolt through Anna's chest. Her mind whirled with the last conversation she'd had with him, his cryptic words, the coldness in his voice. She couldn't stop herself from asking, her voice trembling, "What does he have to do with all this?" Edward's expression remained unreadable. "Your husband is involved in something far deeper than you realize, Ms. Whitaker. And I'm afraid the inheritance you were expecting is just the surface of it all." Anna's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Michael. Michael promised me that inheritance. It was the one thing I knew was going to change everything." Her voice broke as she spoke, the weight of her hopes crashing down around her. "Tell me what's going on. Please." Edward leaned forward slightly, his fingers still tapping the desk. "Michael has been involved with a network that has a far-reaching influence, far beyond anything you could imagine. The inheritance you were promised? It's not what you think. And Michael has been keeping something from you, a secret that involves more than just money." The words hit Anna like a slap in the face. Her mind raced. She couldn't process it all. This wasn't just about money, it was about something bigger, something darker. "Why didn't he tell me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would he keep this from me?" Edward's eyes softened, just for a moment. Michael had his reasons, but they don't matter right now. What matters is that you're involved, whether you want to be or not. You're tied to this web, Ms. Whitaker. And the sooner you understand that, the better. Anna felt like she was suffocating. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but something in Edward's calm demeanor kept her at bay. The urgency in his words, the quiet certainty in his eyes, this wasn't a man who dealt in lies. She could tell. He knew something. He had answers. "What do you mean, I'm involved?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I don't even know what's going on." Edward sat back in his chair, his fingers steepling as if contemplating how to break the news to her. "It's about the inheritance, yes. But it's also about the money laundering operation Michael has been running, the ties to criminal organizations he's been hiding, and the people who will stop at nothing to get what they're owed." Anna felt as if the room was spinning. This couldn't be true. Michael? A part of something illegal? The very thought was inconceivable. He was her partner, her husband. He was the one who held her hand through hard times, the one she thought she could trust. How could he betray her like this? "I don't understand," she said softly, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've been waiting for years, hoping that this inheritance would be the thing that saved us. And now it's all a lie." Edward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a folder on the desk and slid it toward her. "I'm afraid that's the case," he said quietly. "Michael's been a key player in a much larger game, and you've been caught in the crossfire." Anna's hand shook as she reached for the folder. She opened it cautiously, not knowing what she would find. Inside were several documents, photographs, legal papers, and what looked like financial statements. Her eyes scanned the papers, her stomach tightening as she saw names she didn't recognize, numbers she couldn't comprehend. But one thing stood out to her immediately: Michael's signature, on multiple documents. It was everywhere. Edward spoke again, his tone serious, almost regretful. "These are just a few pieces of the puzzle, Ms. Whitaker. Michael's involvement with several international criminal organizations has been well documented. And unfortunately, you're now implicated in this web." Anna couldn't process it. Her mind was struggling to keep up with the enormity of what Edward was telling her. Michael was a criminal? Her husband, her partner, the man she loved, was a part of something illegal, something so dangerous that it involved the police, the government, and people who didn't hesitate to hurt others to get what they wanted. The photographs were the hardest to look at, images of Michael meeting with individuals she didn't recognize, shaking hands with them in private settings. Each image felt like a betrayal, each one like a piece of her life shattering in slow motion. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" Edward's eyes softened again, but only for a moment. "We need your help, Ms. Whitaker. The people involved in this operation are dangerous. Michael has gone into hiding, and we don't know where he is. But we believe that you can help us get the answers we need." Anna shook her head. "I don't know anything. I haven't even heard of these people. I don't know where Michael is." Her heart was pounding in her chest. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the weight of her reality crashing down. "I just want to understand. What is going on? Why was he keeping this from me?" Edward leaned forward again, his gaze intense. "Because he didn't want you to get hurt. Michael was trying to protect you, but in doing so, he kept you in the dark. He thought that if you knew, you would be in danger. And, in a way, he was right. These people are ruthless. And now they're after you too." The words hung in the air between them like a heavy, suffocating cloud. Anna could feel her world crumbling beneath her feet. How had things gone so wrong? How had her life, the life she had built with Michael, become a nightmare? "We need you to cooperate, Ms. Whitaker," Edward continued, his voice calm and steady. "We need to find Michael before they do. You're the key to getting him back, to putting an end to this. But you need to trust us. Trust them? How could she trust anyone now? She had trusted Michael, and look where that had gotten her. Anna sat back in her chair, her mind a whirlwind of emotions: fear, confusion, anger, betrayal. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The man she had married, the man she thought she knew, was gone. And in his place was a stranger, a man involved in things that Anna couldn't even begin to understand. Edward watched her silently, giving her space to process. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Anna spoke, her voice shaky but determined. "What do you want me to do?" Edward's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting into something more urgent. "We need you to help us find Michael. We need you to tell us everything you know about him. Where he might be hiding, what he's been involved in. We can protect you, but we need your cooperation." Anna nodded slowly, though her heart was heavy. This wasn't the life she had imagined. This wasn't the future she had dreamed of. She had trusted Michael. She had believed in their love, in their life together. And now she was being dragged into a nightmare she didn't understand. But if there was any chance of finding him, of uncovering the truth, she had no choice but to cooperate. Michael had lied to her, kept her in the dark, but now it was her turn to uncover the truth. And nothing, no matter how dark or dangerous, would stop her from finding out what had happened to the man she had once loved. The silence in the office was oppressive, suffocating. The only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant ticking of a clock on the wall. Anna's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. How had everything come to this point? She had spent years with Michael, trusting him, loving him, believing in their life together. And now, everything was crumbling around her. The man she had married was tangled in a web of lies, and she was caught right in the middle of it. Edward's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, his tone calm, almost soothing. "I understand that this is overwhelming, but you need to understand the gravity of the situation. The people Michael is involved with won't stop until they get what they want. And right now, you're a part of that equation." Anna sat in the chair, feeling a growing sense of dread. Her hands gripped the folder in front of her, the photographs and papers she had seen earlier still haunting her thoughts. Michael's signature was on everything, and it was clear that he had been involved in something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Edward continued, his eyes narrowing as he spoke. "Michael's disappearance isn't just about him going into hiding. It's about the people he's betrayed. The people he's crossed. And those people, they don't forgive easily." She felt a chill run down her spine as his words sank in. Betrayal. That was what this was all about, wasn't it? Michael had betrayed her trust, had betrayed their marriage. But this was something far worse. These were dangerous people. People who didn't care about consequences. People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt her if it meant getting to Michael. "Where is he?" Anna's voice cracked as she spoke, her heart hammering in her chest. "Where did he go? What's happening? What do they want with me?" Edward's expression softened, just slightly. "We're still trying to find that out. But you need to understand, Michael didn't just run. He's being hunted. And the longer it takes for us to find him, the more dangerous it becomes." Anna's thoughts were spiraling out of control. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was a fugitive. And now, because of his actions, her life was in danger too. She was in a place she never thought she would be, surrounded by strangers who were claiming to want to help her, but who, in truth, had their own agenda. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Edward leaned forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I know you're scared. But I'm going to be blunt with you, Ms. Whitaker. The people Michael is involved with, these aren't just petty criminals. They're dangerous. They have connections everywhere. And if we don't move quickly, they'll come for you. Anna's mind raced. She had been waiting for something like this, something to come crashing into her life. But she had never expected it to be so terrifying, so much bigger than she could comprehend. Michael had always been a man of mystery. But now she was seeing that the mystery wasn't just about his secrets. It was about something much darker. And it was pulling her down with it. "Why are you telling me this?" Anna asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "What's your interest in all of this?" Edward's eyes held a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, but his expression quickly returned to its usual professionalism. "Because, Ms. Whitaker, you're the only one who can help us. You're the only one who has information about Michael that we don't. And right now, we need to know everything. Anything you know could lead us to him." Anna didn't respond immediately. She was torn between a growing sense of loyalty to Michael and the realization that he had lied to her on a scale she could never have imagined. She had always believed in the best of him, but now the truth was coming to light, truth she hadn't been ready to face. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know where he is. I don't know what he's involved in. I thought it was just about the money, the inheritance. But now I see that it's much more than that. But I don't understand any of it." Edward nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's okay. You don't have to understand everything. But you need to understand that you're in danger. Michael's past is catching up with him, and if we don't find him soon, things are going to get much worse." Anna swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. Her hands were shaking now, her thoughts a jumbled mess. She had no idea what to do next. She didn't know if she could trust Edward, if she could trust any of this. All she knew was that she was being pulled into a world that she had never asked for, a world of crime, deception, and violence. She wanted to leave. To run. But where would she go? Who could she turn to? The truth was, she was alone in this. And as much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't ignore the fact that these men might be her only chance to find Michael and get some answers. "Please," she said, her voice more forceful now. "I need to know everything. I can't do this without understanding what's happening." Edward seemed to study her for a moment before nodding. "All right. Let's start from the beginning." Edward stood up and walked over to a nearby bookshelf, pulling out a thick binder filled with documents. He placed it on the table in front of Anna, his hand steady as he opened it to the first page. "This," he said, pointing to a series of photos, "is Michael's most recent involvement with an international crime syndicate. They operate under the radar, laundering money, trafficking goods, and securing illegal investments. Michael's role, though not entirely clear, was crucial. He was their inside man, the one who made deals and ensured the operation ran smoothly." Anna's breath caught in her throat. This was the man she had married? The man who had promised her a future of stability and comfort? She couldn't believe it. How had he gotten involved with people like this? What had made him do it? She had no answers. Edward continued. Michael's involvement in these operations went unnoticed for years. But recently, things began to unravel. He started making mistakes, small things at first, but enough to raise suspicion. That's when he decided to disappear. He thought he could just walk away, but these people don't let anyone go that easily. The words hung in the air like a suffocating fog. Anna's mind was reeling, trying to piece together the details. Michael had been part of something this big? Something that involved human trafficking, money laundering, and who knew what else? "Do you have any idea why Michael got involved in all this?" Anna asked, her voice breaking. "He was always so normal. So protective of me. I don't understand how this could happen." Edward paused, his gaze softening just a fraction. "I don't know, Ms. Whitaker. That's a question we're still trying to answer. But what I can tell you is that Michael was in over his head. And now, so are you. Anna's mind raced. Michael had been playing a dangerous game, and she had been completely unaware. She had been left in the dark, living a lie. The realization hit her harder than anything else. The man she loved had been leading a double life, and she had been just another piece in the puzzle. "So," she said, looking up at Edward, "what do you want me to do now?" Edward studied her carefully. "We need you to help us track him down. If you can give us any hint, any clue as to where he might be, we can end this before it gets worse." Anna didn't know where to begin. She had no idea where Michael could be. But there was one thing she did know: she couldn't just sit back and let everything fall apart. She had to try, even if it meant stepping into a world she didn't understand, a world that might swallow her whole. "I'll help you," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "But I need to know what I'm walking into. I need to know the truth." Edward nodded. "You'll get the truth. But be prepared, Ms. Whitaker. This is a road that may not lead back to where you think it will. It's a dark road, full of secrets and danger. And once you start down it, there's no turning back." Anna felt the weight of his words settle over her like a cloak. She didn't know where this path would lead, or what truths she would uncover. But one thing was certain: she wasn't going to stop until she found Michael. Even if it meant losing everything she once believed in. Anna walked through the cold, sterile halls of the law firm, her footsteps echoing off the polished floors. The weight of what she had just learned settled like a stone in her stomach, pressing down on her with every step. Michael, the man she had shared her life with, was a part of something dark, something she couldn't yet understand. She was a part of it now, too, whether she liked it or not. She had been pulled into a web of lies, secrets, and dangerous people who had no intention of letting her go. Edward had been straightforward with her. Too straightforward, in fact. His cold professionalism was unsettling, but it was clear that he was just as entangled in this mess as she was. If she wanted to find Michael, she would have to work with him. But trust? Trust was something she didn't know if she could give. Not after everything. The details of Michael's secret life still felt unreal, like something from a spy novel or a crime thriller. Yet it was real, so real that it was threatening to consume her. She paused at the end of the hallway, the door to Edward's office just ahead. She had no idea what they were about to uncover, but she knew one thing: there was no going back. She had already crossed a line, and whatever happened next, she couldn't erase what she had learned. She couldn't forget the pictures of Michael shaking hands with people who were far from ordinary businessmen. These weren't just criminals, they were dangerous. And now, she had no choice but to face them. As she reached the door to Edward's office, she hesitated for a moment. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she couldn't turn back now. With a deep breath, she knocked and stepped inside. Edward was sitting behind his desk, reviewing more papers. His sharp eyes flicked up when she entered, and he gestured for her to take a seat. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I trust you're ready to move forward?" Anna nodded, though she didn't feel ready at all. How could she be? Every new piece of information she uncovered made the situation more complicated, more dangerous. But she had to keep moving. For Michael. She had to find him, no matter what it took. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Edward smiled, though it was more of a tight-lipped gesture than a real smile. "Good. Because what we're about to dive into is going to make everything you've seen so far seem like a walk in the park. I hope you understand what that means." Anna sat down across from him, her hands gripping the edge of the chair, her heart pounding in her chest. "Just tell me what's next. I don't care about the details anymore. I just want to find him." Edward didn't respond right away. Instead, he slid a thick folder toward her. "This is what we know about Michael's last known location. We've traced his movements, but it's not enough. We need you to remember everything. Every conversation, every detail that might seem insignificant. Because something tells me that you know more than you realize. She looked down at the folder, her mind racing. Michael had always been secretive, but she had never suspected the level of danger he was involved in. She had always thought it was just about the money, about the inheritance. But now she knew the truth. Michael had been hiding from people who were willing to do anything to get what they wanted. And she was now a part of that equation. Her life had been irrevocably changed, and there was no going back. Anna opened the folder and began to sift through the papers inside. There were more photographs, of Michael meeting with people she didn't recognize, images of him at various locations that made her stomach twist with dread. There were financial records, all pointing to the same conclusion: Michael had been laundering money through various shell companies, funneling money into criminal enterprises. She couldn't believe it. This wasn't the man she had married. This wasn't the man she had trusted. But the evidence was right in front of her. Edward leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. "We've also uncovered something else," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "There's a mole in our operation. Someone is leaking information to the people Michael is hiding from. Someone within our team." The words hit Anna like a punch to the gut. A mole? Someone was betraying them? She had no idea who she could trust anymore. The people she thought were on her side could just as easily be working against her. It was a terrifying thought. "Do you have any idea who it could be?" Anna asked, her voice tight with fear. Edward shook his head. "Not yet. But we're working on it. The last thing we need is for them to find out what we're doing before we find Michael." Anna closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process everything. The walls were closing in. The people Michael had crossed weren't going to wait much longer. They were out there, searching for him, and she had to find him before they did. But how? How could she find someone who didn't want to be found? "Do you have a lead?" Anna asked, her voice trembling despite herself. "Any idea where he might be?" Edward nodded slowly. "We've traced his movements to a location just outside of the city. It's remote. Isolated. But it's not much. We need you to come with us. We think he's there, but we need confirmation. And time is running out." Anna felt a chill run down her spine. A remote location? Isolated? It sounded like the perfect place for someone to disappear. Michael had always been resourceful, but she had no idea how far he had gone to cover his tracks. "I'll go," she said, her voice steady despite the terror gnawing at her insides. "But I need you to promise me something." Edward raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "If anything happens, if anything goes wrong, I need you to promise me that you'll keep me safe. I'm not getting involved in this for my own sake. I'm doing it for Michael. But I need to know that I'm not walking into a trap." Edward's expression softened just a fraction. "You have my word. But remember, the people we're dealing with are dangerous. And they will do anything to stop us." Anna nodded, though her heart was in her throat. She wasn't sure if she could trust Edward, but she had no other choice. She had to find Michael, no matter what. The drive to the isolated location felt like an eternity. Anna stared out of the window, her thoughts racing. They were headed into the unknown. Into a place where danger lurked around every corner. She had no idea what awaited them there. But one thing was certain, she had to face whatever was coming. For Michael. The car jolted over rough terrain as they drove further into the wilderness. The trees grew thicker, the road more treacherous. Anna's palms were clammy as she gripped the door, her anxiety growing with every mile. Finally, they reached the end of the road. Edward signaled for her to get out, and she reluctantly obeyed. The air was thick with tension as they made their way toward a dilapidated cabin in the distance. It looked abandoned, but something about it felt wrong. The hairs on the back of Anna's neck stood up as they approached. "This is it," Edward said, his voice low. "Stay close, and be prepared for anything." Anna nodded, though fear clenched her chest. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she couldn't back down now. Not when Michael's life, and possibly her own, was at stake. They crept closer to the cabin, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass. Anna's heart pounded in her chest as they reached the door. Edward nodded to her, signaling for her to stay back. He moved forward, his hand on the door handle, and then stopped. He motioned for the others to cover him. The door creaked open. The air was thick with tension as Anna stood at the edge of the cabin, her heart hammering in her chest. The door had creaked open, revealing nothing but shadows and the smell of decay. Edward's hand, still on the door handle, paused for a moment, as if sensing something was wrong. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice low and controlled. His eyes flicked around, scanning the surroundings. Anna nodded, her body tense, every muscle screaming at her to run, to leave this place, but she knew she couldn't. Not when she was so close to the truth. She had to see this through. The creaking of the door echoed in the stillness of the forest as they entered the cabin. The dim light filtering through the broken windows cast long, eerie shadows across the floor. Dust particles danced in the air, swirling with the faintest trace of neglect. The place looked abandoned, but Anna's instincts told her otherwise. This wasn't just some forgotten shack, it was a hiding place, a last refuge. Michael had been here. She could feel it in her bones. Edward stepped in first, his hand motioning for Anna to follow. She hesitated for only a second before stepping across the threshold. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath their feet, and the silence pressed in on them, suffocating and oppressive. The cabin was small, with just a few rooms, the furniture sparse and weathered. The walls, once painted, were now peeling, revealing layers of time and neglect. But it was the smell that hit Anna first, the faint, metallic scent of blood. Her stomach churned, and she instinctively took a step back. "Stay focused," Edward murmured, his eyes scanning the room methodically. Anna swallowed hard, forcing herself to ignore the creeping dread rising within her. She couldn't afford to be afraid now. She had come too far to let fear stop her. Edward gestured toward the far end of the room, where a door led into a back room. "We need to check there. This is where Michael was last seen." With her heart in her throat, Anna nodded. They moved together toward the door, the air in the cabin growing colder, heavier. The door swung open, revealing a narrow hallway that led to a small bedroom at the end. The room was dark, but through the gaps in the blinds, Anna could see just enough to make out the silhouette of a figure sitting at a table. "Stay back," Edward ordered, his voice tight. He drew his gun from its holster, his movements swift and practiced. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't see the figure's face, but she could tell it was Michael. It had to be. This was the moment. She had to confront him. Edward approached cautiously, his eyes never leaving the shadowed figure. Anna stood frozen in place, every inch of her screaming to run to him, but she couldn't. Not yet. Edward stopped just a few feet from the figure, his gun aimed steadily at the back of Michael's head. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice low and firm. "Michael Whitaker, you're surrounded. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The figure didn't move. For a long moment, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Anna felt her pulse pounding in her ears. Was it really him? Was Michael really here, alive, hiding in this filthy cabin? Then, slowly, the figure turned around. It was him. But the face she saw wasn't the one she had known. His once sharp features were gaunt, his skin pale and stretched thin over the bones. His eyes, once full of warmth and affection, were now hollow, dark, and guarded. "Michael," Anna whispered, her voice breaking. She stepped forward, unable to contain the rush of emotions flooding her chest. He didn't respond at first, just stared at her with an unreadable expression. But then, something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, of regret, and of fear. "Anna," he said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here. This is a mess. A dangerous mess." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she took another step closer. "What's going on, Michael? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me?" Michael's gaze dropped to the table in front of him, his fingers trembling as they ran across the surface. He looked like a man who had lost everything: hope, peace, and himself. "I never wanted this for you, Anna," he said quietly, his voice thick with guilt. "I never wanted you to be a part of this. But I didn't have a choice. They were going to kill me if I didn't do what they said. I got in too deep." Edward, still standing behind Anna, spoke up. "Michael, you don't get to play the victim here. You betrayed everyone, including your wife." Michael's head snapped up, and for the first time, Anna saw real anger in his eyes. "You don't understand. You have no idea what it's like to be trapped by people who will do anything to get what they want. I couldn't get out. I tried. I tried to protect her, Anna, but it all spiraled out of control." Anna's mind was racing. Betrayal, fear, and guilt mixed in a swirling tornado of emotions. The man she had loved, the man she had believed in, was broken, standing before her in a way she didn't recognize. He was confessing to everything she hadn't wanted to believe. And yet, his words rang with truth, too much truth. She shook her head, unable to hold back the tears. "But you lied to me, Michael. You kept everything from me. You let me think it was all about the inheritance. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth." He stepped toward her then, his face anguished. "I couldn't risk it. I couldn't let you get involved. I never wanted you to see this side of my life. I thought I could protect you. But I was wrong. I didn't think they'd come after you, Anna. I never thought that would happen." Suddenly, the sound of a door crashing open behind them sent Anna's heart into overdrive. She spun around just in time to see a group of men storm into the room, their faces masked, their weapons drawn. Edward reacted instantly, his gun raised. "Get down," he shouted, shoving Anna to the ground. The room erupted into chaos. Gunshots rang out, deafening in the confined space of the cabin. Anna felt her body instinctively curl into a ball, trying to shield herself from the danger. The world felt like it was collapsing around her. She heard Michael shout, a frantic cry that cut through the chaos. "No! Stay down!" But the shouts, the gunfire, the panic, it was too much. Anna's vision blurred as fear and adrenaline overtook her senses. The sound of Michael's voice calling her name was the last thing she remembered before everything went dark. When Anna awoke, she was lying on the cold wooden floor of the cabin. The gunshots had stopped, and the silence was oppressive. Her head throbbed, and her body felt heavy, like she had been dragged across the floor. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness hit her. Her eyes scanned the room, and then, through the haze, she saw him. Michael was kneeling beside her, his hands gripping her shoulders as he tried to keep her steady. "Anna," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You're safe. It's over." The words didn't make sense at first. But as she focused, she realized that the men who had stormed the cabin were gone. The danger had passed. And somehow, they had survived. Michael's eyes were wide with a mix of relief and guilt. "I never wanted this for you," he repeated, his voice cracking. Anna didn't know what to say. She was numb. All the questions she had, about the betrayal, the lies, the secrets, still hung in the air. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him. But in that moment, one thing was clear: she had made it through the storm, and so had he. She let out a slow breath, her body trembling with the weight of everything that had happened. "What now, Michael?" He looked at her, and for the first time, his face softened. "Now we figure out how to move forward. Together."